Chris, why do you think it's important that this surveillance database is exposed and that the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, the actions they're taking to control their citizens is exposed? And what risk are the activists who brought this database to you, what risk have they taken in doing so?
I think the activists are at not insignificant risk by any stretch of the imagination. I was talking to an individual recently that was involved in the house church movement in China, and they were talking about how in their city, roughly, let's say 1 year ago, there was a major crackdown on house churches, and they simply didn't know how authorities figured out, because they had been very careful to rotate houses, rotate individuals, so that it was very difficult to detect. And with the data that we're seeing now and the surveillance capability that they have, that the government maintains, this seems to answer a lot of questions about how that is happening. And so this seems to imply that Beijing is essentially extending its Xinjiang level crackdown and control to minorities, to religious groups, to basically anything that is a threat to the CCP. And we need to be aware of, when we're talking about China as a threat, the threat that they pose not just to the rest of the world, but to their own citizens and the human rights at stake here.
Just when you talk about the crackdown on home churches, is it any particular religion now that they're targeting, or it's just all religions, that aren't Chinese Buddhist?
I think it's pretty much all religions that are not Chinese Buddhist, and I think fundamentally it's about individuals that they would deem that would be less than loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. So this is why we see minorities targeted. This is why we see Christians, Muslims, anyone that Beijing deems would not be loyal to the CCP or would potentially have an identity outside of that nationalistic Han racialism that Beijing is pushing.
Yeah. Rob, you've all previously had quite a significant leak on the World Health Organization and on the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is just a few months ago, and where you actually found that the database, much of the database was deleted and didn't match the data they'd given to the World Health Organization. Can you tell me a bit about this and what you think the significance of this shows when it comes to China's cover-up of the coronavirus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was brought into a story at the Washington Post around a set of passwords that had leaked onto the public internet. Some of those passwords had been used across multiple accounts and been dressed up to look essentially like a breach of the WHO and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Unfortunately for those institutions, a number of those passwords were still current, even though they'd come from other mediums. As a result, hackers were able to get access to some of those systems. As a result of my public profile jumping up a little bit during that story, some people sent me some of the data from inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology, in particular a National Defense University database. They were sent to both Chris and myself. When we analysed that, it was a bit of a mismatch of data against what they'd been publicly putting out there to the World Health Organization. It didn't match what they were saying, but it's going to take some time to restore that data so that real numbers can be dragged out of that by highly qualified and capable database engineers. However, there were about 640,000 entries in that particular database, and day to day, you could see that cases were slightly different to what they were reporting publicly, as well as the fact that there was no data from before a certain point in time. So once the story became quite a bit contentious, when the Chinese Communist Party realised that the coronavirus was going to become a global pandemic, they went about, it appears, purging some of the data out of this particular database.
Absolutely fascinating. Chris, is there anything you want to add to what happened behind the scenes, or what you think the fact that they purged that database shows about their intentions on the origins of the virus or the cover-up of the virus?
I think one of the things that a lot of people fail to understand is not just is China censoring for political purposes, but there's a lot of people in China censoring for career purposes. And so a lot of information is getting censored upwards to their superiors. And so I think one of the things that was happening with that data is it appears to have been censored upwards so that it had been censored internally many times before they released the data. And so this seems to indicate that they basically had some type of internal targets that they wanted to hit to try and show progress. And so this seems to imply that they were fudging their own numbers for their own purposes as well as external purposes.